In the last segment, I was discussing with Alabama Attorney General Steve Marshall the legal arguments in the case that was before the U.S. Supreme Court regarding Tennessee's law that protects minors from so-called gender transition procedures, which are both experimental and they're surgical and they're irreversible. And now I want to turn a little bit to the scientific aspects of this issue, as well as really the emotional issues, the psychological issues. So joining me now to discuss this, Dr. Jennifer Bauwens, Director of the Center for Family Studies here at the Family Research Council. Dr. Bauwens has worked extensively as a researcher and a clinician providing trauma-focused treatment to children in foster care and behavioral health settings, and also to adults who've experienced interpersonal traumas. Dr. Bauwens, thanks for joining us today.
Good to be with you, Tony.
Now, you spoke at the rally there on the steps of the Supreme Court in support of Tennessee's law earlier today. Give us a sense of what the environment was like there.
It was a wild scene, Tony. um, it's always interesting when the only arguments people have are to get very angry and emotional. And of course, we had emotion on our side too. This issue is very, it's a lightning rod for sure. But we had people coming over from the other side with bullhorns while we're talking,
Yeah.
and blaring them. So not
That's
exactly
typical.
the most civil.
That's typical. I've been there many times, and they try to shout you down because they really can't defend the position that they're holding. Therefore, they want to silence the opposition, and that's really what we're seeing in this cancel culture. But inside the courtroom, the facts were talked about. Now, we were talking about with Attorney General Steve Marshall that it was focused more on the legal, not so much the scientific. They didn't get into that. That obviously is disappointing because that's one of the areas that you focused on.
Yeah. And, some of the things that should be brought out, which I've mentioned in testimonies before, which is we don't have any research that shows, let's just for a minute play that this is a real idea. We don't have any research that says who's going to, enjoy gender affirming care over time. If there's such thing as non-binary and fluid gender, then who's going to stay the opposite sex for how long? And so then you've removed their body parts, and then they've decided a year from now that they're actually, swashing back to a different gender. And, ideally in the scientific world, you'd have instruments that you would develop that would predict those types of things. But we're just going in like the Wild West, just performing all kinds of crazy experiments on children without any sense of real grounding in the scientific method. And that's why I said in my speech today, these procedures should have never been performed on a single child.
I think in years from now, we'll look back on this as we have on other things that have been done in this country where, people have been sterilized and other actions have been taken. Even you look to what the Nazis did in their medical experimentation that they did on human beings. Now, I know they did, I don't want to do total comparison, but the fact is, we look back on that and we're shocked that we allowed that to happen. And I think this is one of those moments. But that said, Dr. Bauwens, these things are real, the emotions that these individuals, the gender dysphoria. But what's been missing, and you and I have talked about this before, is to go to the source of the issue that's driving the dysphoria, the fact they're uncomfortable, they don't feel like they're in the right sex. Usually this is attached to some form of trauma.
Yeah, that's right. And a lot of the think tanks on the other side who are in support of this issue, their own research has shown that a number of people who are trans-identified have big, huge trauma histories. I mean, we're talking a significant portion of people, and those are just the ones who know enough to claim that. So we're not even talking about the people who don't even have a sense of what trauma is, which you might think that seems illogical, but it's true. Doing trauma work, a lot of times people are so accustomed to living a certain way and experiencing horrific things that they don't identify
So
that
when we
as
say
wrong.
trauma, give us some, our viewers and listeners, some sense
Yeah.
of the type of trauma we're talking about.
Well, sexual abuse, physical abuse, some forms of emotional abuse. You know, when someone is calling you names and degrading your personhood, or withholding basic care from your life, especially as a child. These are forms of abuse that many of the trans identified people have gone through. And again, maybe it's not to that level, but usually you can, you know, if you work with someone, you can find a source of where this idea came from. And that's what's not happening in the mental
Right.
health profession
And that becomes,
is
it can become kind of a defense mechanism as
yes.
well to keep this trauma from occurring again. So as we debate this public policy, and we're firmly, we stand on the truth, man and woman, God created male and female. But we need to approach it with compassion and understanding that these are people that are often hurting and they need help. It's just not through a scalpel or through drugs, experimental drugs. It's something else that they're in search of and they need help with.
Yeah, and we're actually our society's been making it worse for these folks because now they have trauma upon trauma to deal with. The very people that they went to for help are inflicting more trauma through the very, you know, supposed answer that they've are giving them. And so we're going to have a lot of people who've been affected by this, not only that have to deal with the root cause, but now they have to deal with, dealing with forgiving a whole profession that has led
Right,
them
right.
astray. It's a blind leading the blind.
Yeah. And it is something that we absolutely need to be praying about and praying for these individuals. It's real for them, and we need to help them find a way out that is right and will lead to a fulfilling life for them. Dr. Bauwens, always great to see you. Thanks so much for joining us.